This is a very special mini episode of the I Read Comic Books podcast because today I'm here with two fantastic people, Nick White.
Hey.
And our very special guest, Dave Baker, the magnificent comic book creator.
I don't think I've been referred to as magnificent before, but I feel like I need to from now on. I need to insist.
Actually, Dave said before we go on the air, this is what you're going to call me. This is exactly what you're going to,
Yeah, it's in my writer. I refuse to do comic book podcast interviews unless I'm referred to as the magnificent Dave Baker.
Dave's rider wasn't that long, but this was at the top of the list.
Exactly. But really, we're here to talk to Dave about like everything that's amazing about comic books, but in specific, we're talking about a book that you have coming out that's currently running on Kickstarter called Night Hunters. Before we get into, all the questions we have about Night Hunters, could you give us a quick pitch about what this book is?
Yeah, absolutely. So Night Hunters is a dystopian cyberpunk comic that takes place in Venezuela 100 years in the future. The twist being that in Venezuela 100 years in the future, it's a police state, meaning if you ever want to run for public office, if you ever want to have a baby in a hospital, if you ever want to rent an apartment, you have to have been or currently be a police officer. The book is drawn by Alexis Ziritt, lettered by Robert Negretti, written by me, with a cover by Alexis and Vanessa Del Rey, or the issue 1 cover by Alexis and Vanessa Del Rey, and it's going to be published by Floating World Comics out of Portland, Oregon.
Yowza. Man, that is a list of names that I really like to hear. As someone who's huge fan of Vanessa Del Rey, huge fan of yours, huge fan of Alexis's, that is stupendous. I mean, seriously, like I've been hooked on Space Riders for forever. Everything that Vanessa Del Rey has done, I've picked up in one way, shape, or form, and I've got a whole stack of your books over on my shelf. This is a really killer Kickstarter, man. How did you guys all come together for this?
So I met Alexis. I mean, I was a fan of his work, obviously. I really loved Space Riders and Tarantula, and I've been following him on Instagram forever and a day. And I met him through our mutual friend, Andrew McLean, who does Headlopper, which is also a very good book that if you haven't read, you should check out.
Oh, yes.
And that was more for the listeners than you. I know you're a cultured man of taste.
True.
I just read that last week.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Nice. Welcome to the Cultured Man of Taste Club. So Andrew and Alexis have been buddies forever. They met doing conventions and stuff, and I met Alexis through Andrew, and we have been talking about doing something for a long time because we both love kind of bootleg, science fiction movies and knockoff Italian rip-off movies, and we like a lot of the same kind of like black and white explosion comics. Obviously, we're both illustrators, and at a certain point, he was just like, "Yeah, I'm looking for my next book," and I was like, "Well, what if we did it together?" And then from there, Night Hunters kind of spiraled out of.
Gotcha. That's stupendous. I mean, it's a really cool concept for a book. I mean, if you guys jump on the Kickstarter, it's on Kickstarter. Some of the preview stuff they have for this book just looks out of this fucking world, or maybe really close to this world, and that's kind of something I kind of want to go into. But I guess what's the basis of where everything started in Venezuela? Like, why Venezuela? Why not the typical New York City or LA or something like that?
Yeah, absolutely. So Alexis is from Venezuela. He emigrated here a number of years ago, and obviously the socio-political system that is currently crumbling in Venezuela is something that we have talked about a lot, and is just, there's a lot of issues right now, and I think that's all, kind of front of mind for him, top of mind, and
right.
So I think that he is very passionate about his roots and his heritage and his culture, and wanted to set this story in an environment that he literally lived in. And he came to me with like some characters and a basic high concept and like, the name of the city and kind of like a rough, kind of broad strokes. Like, I have this idea that we would do a cyberpunk comic in Venezuela, and this guy would be the main guy, and it would be like some police dudes, I think, and he had some drawings. So he had some drawings of the main couple characters, and we kind of talked about it and riffed on it, and I talked to him about kind of life in Venezuela and what his journey to the States has been, and from there we kind of built the world of Night Hunters and this kind of, dystopian society around some of those core ideas. He's a big film buff, as am I, and we're both big comics nerds, obviously. So there's a lot of kind of shared language of Philip K. Dick and, Ridley Scott and, Masamune Shirow and Katsuhiro Otomo and, Blade Runner 2049 even. We talk a lot about Blade Runner 2049 and how much we fucking loved that movie. And, yeah.
Very cool. Well, Nick, I'll let you jump in. I know you got a bunch of questions that you had laid out before this.
Yeah, I mean, I guess one of the interesting things that one can't help but notice is that sort of Cyberpunk is like very much in the pop culture periphery right now. Like, it's, even if it's not something that you're actively seeking out, it's hard to ignore the fact that it's really ever present, like wherever you're looking. And I mean, when you look at stuff like Cyberpunk 2077 is set to release in April of next year, and they just put out the prequel to that, Cyberpunk Red. I think the starter kit rolled out about a month or two ago. Was any of this sort of like anything that you were paying attention to as I mean, obviously Alexis came to you with the idea, but I was curious if any of this either influenced or inspired or sort of had anything to do with your own work and what came about. Because, like I said, it's hard to ignore that this is, it feels like we've shifted away from like the post-apocalyptic obsession of the last, I don't know, decade, and we're moving towards this.
Yeah, no, I agree that is definitely a shift, a paradigm shift that is currently transpiring. And I think that Alexis and I have been, kind of shopping this around and working on this book for probably about 2 years. The whole thing is written right now. And, so we've been talking about it for a long time. And I think it was kind of one of those scenarios where when we started talking about this, that paradigm wasn't as prevalent.
Like, not fully formed, yeah.
Yeah, like there was still, obviously, there was a couple Cyberpunk books at Image, and, I think just culturally, people have been talking more and more about William Gibson and some of the kind of, Mona Lisa Overdrive, Johnny Mnemonic-y.
Just reading Neuromancer for the first time right now, so I don't know how all these coincidences keep happening, but I mean,
See, yeah, but like Neuromancer is a perfect example, right? And like there's so much in that book that while it is like a noir detective story kind of, it also has so many. I mean, obviously, Neuromancer is like the quintessential cyberpunk story. I think, was it Mona Lisa Overdrive or Neuromancer that he literally, because William Gibson coined the term, and I don't remember for which book, but it was one of those books that he was like, no, I feel like I make cyberpunk. But I don't remember which book it was.
I think it was Neuromancer. I think it came out of Neuromancer for sure.
Okay, yeah. See, you're closer to that than I am. I read Neuromancer a while ago, but it's been a few years since I've read it. And yeah, I think, so over the course of us putting it together, the paradigm kept getting closer and closer, and all of these things kept bubbling up more and more and more. And I think it was kind of just a scenario where it was like, if we don't do this now, we're not going to do it because it'll be too oversaturated. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Like, right.
We need to bite the bullet and just dive in, because if we do this another year from now or 2 years from now, it's going to look like we're copying a bunch of other stuff, when in fact we started doing this, as like a throwback to a genre that we both really like, but that wasn't that popular at the time. And now, and it also doesn't help that the game is literally called Cyberpunk,
Nope, no, it does not.
Yeah. But yeah, so I mean, I like all those things, and I'm excited that Cyberpunk stuff is kind of bubbling up more. But yeah, there is a small part of you that's kind of like, oh boy, Did we are we riding the crest of a wave, or are we going to be now, submerged under a deluge of other content that's very similar?
Right, like where do we fall in the big picture? And the only thing we can do is get it out and see, I suppose.
Yeah, and the thing that we've been talking a lot about is Paul Verhoeven and RoboCop specifically, just because that book at a distance looks like it's one thing, and when you get closer, it's another. From a distance, it's like, oh, it's a fun action movie, and then you get close, and you're like, oh my god, this is like the most intense social satire I've ever witnessed. This is great. So, not that I'm necessarily saying that we're trying to literally do that, but I think that that's something that, like every genre that has a quote-unquote movement to it, the initial entries that had so much cultural import and kind of voice to them inevitably get boiled down into a system of icons that become kind of redundant. Like, post-apocalyptic movies are great, and I like a lot of them, but at a certain point, they stop being about man's darker nature, and they just start being about, look at this guy with a mohawk,
Right.
Yeah.
Like, I love
go ahead.
a lot of that stuff. I love a lot of that stuff. Even a lot of the things that are just look at this guy with a mohawk are still really fun. But, I feel like, for lack of a better example, The Road Warrior is probably the quintessential post-apocalyptic film, and a lot of it just kind of, people take a lot of the wrong lessons from it. They don't think of it as an indictment or an exploitation of some of those darker themes, and more of a just like, look at this fashion.
Right. Yeah. Someone's going to have a mohawk. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's interesting that you bring up that point about people Jesus. Let me try that again. It's interesting that you brought up the idea of people taking away the wrong lessons, because when I was reading up about your book and reading up on the Kickstarter and other interviews, one of the things that I kept coming back to was Judge Dredd, right? And how if you look at what the British, strip, the weekly strip was, and if you look at the satire that was going on there and sort of how it portrayed Dredd and how it portrayed Mega City 1 compared to, our Stallone movie, compared to even IDW's take on the book, you sort of have what you were talking about, which is this distillation, and where you go from, ideas, and you simply extract the icons and images that you find most, meaningful, and just boil it down to that. And that was kind of something I thought was sort of interesting. Just sort of the evolution of Dredd.
Yeah, it's always really interesting to me to see all these guys dressed as judges at conventions, because I like the iconography of the judges too. They look cool, they're well designed. Dressing up like a judge is probably really fun, because you get to embrace this kind of uniformity, and like, I'm one of many, and there's a comfort and a solace that comes with that. But then there's also like a darker kind of sociological undertone to that, which is like, you are relinquishing individuality to be a literal fascist tool. Like, that's what you're excited about. It's the same.
That's usually my icebreaker when I see these people. I just no.
Yeah, no, but and look, I think a lot of people don't think about the power that those images have, and they're just like, stormtroopers look cool. My friends and I look cool when we dress like stormtroopers, and that's kind of the end of it. And I think there should be room for that to a certain degree. I think there should be allowances made for people to express themselves and have fun. Like, if somebody wants to dress as Darth Vader because they relate to the power behind him, that's great. But also, every once in a while, I find myself being like, yeah, but he's Space Hitler. Like, you want to be Space Hitler?
I think, unfortunately, we've learned that iconic design is not something that's isolated to good guys.
Oh, yeah.
Therein lies the tragedy, right?
Right, yeah. And a lot of times, the villains are better designed because their motivations are usually more singular and more aggressive. And, most times people relate to that in a very specific and easily codifiable way. Like, I am frustrated by situation X, and I feel better about situation X when I dress like the Punisher, or when I wear a Punisher t-shirt, or when I, and like, if that helps you get through the day, awesome. But also, there's a darker side to that, where these things are, these symbols mean things, and how we're choosing to communicate our ideological aspirations to each other. I think that is a very specific and important aspect of living in a society. I think when someone dresses aggressively, sometimes there's like, oh, that person is a weaker person, and they're trying to make themselves feel better by dressing more aggressively. And when they're dressing more, down, then it can be the same thing. And I don't know. I feel like I'm rambling now, but you understand what I'm saying.
No, I mean, I think when you talk about how design influences, mood, I think that's a nice pivot to talk about Alexis's art, because for me, I really like it because I feel like, for better or for worse, Cyberpunk has sort of hit this level of sorts of signs and signifiers which used to represent something deeper, but now Cyberpunk kind of has sort of a checklist, you know what I mean, of this is what you do to be Cyberpunk. Someone's going to have a mohawk, someone's going to have a visor, someone's going to have spikes on shoulder pads, and someone's going to have like a plug where you can jack into the back of their head, right? And so I really like Alexis's art because, for me, there's less of a sort of alluring glamour to that stuff, and there's a much darker kind of connotation, if that makes sense. Like, his artwork doesn't be like, ooh, neon colors and flashy, makeup and things like that. Everything looks appropriately terrifying.
That's actually one thing I really appreciated about the bits and pieces we've seen on the Kickstarter is this book is very bright and colorful, and yet somehow everything about it feels dark and gloomy. Like, somehow there is a bright yellow page, and yet all I can feel is terror. And I love that about this book. I mean, specifically, there is a page with this peace through superior obedience, which just haunts me to look at, because there's this beautiful, like, wall mural thing of someone's hands in chains. I mean, that's actually something I wanted to ask you about, which we can get to, I guess, in a little bit, because I know you wanted to jump in about what Nick said, but I really love the way that, even with the bright colors and the neon, pinks and greens and stuff, this book still feels very dark. Like, not in like a thematic way, but in like a visual way. There's just a darkness to the book, which is amazing.
Yeah, I think, the utilizing those tropes to get a certain number of people in the door is definitely an intentional choice, right? Like, Alexis was like, I want to draw dudes with robot arms and machine guns. And I was like, great, I want to see you draw dudes with robot arms and machine guns. Let's do this. But beyond that, though, that's when I kind of came in and was like, okay, so if we're drawing these mechanized soldiers, that's proto-fascist imagery, and I don't want them, without spoiling anything, I don't want to depict that as the ideal. You know what I mean? I don't want that to be, we shouldn't be looking up to those people, even though they are the protagonists in a very Judge Dredd style. How are we depicting them? Why are we depicting them this way? And what is the ultimate resolution of our observation of these people?
Exactly.
Because like the book opens with the two main characters, Ezekiel and Julian, as little kids, and they're like around a fire, and they're eating rats. And one of them, Julian, says, like, I don't like the brown ones. The brown ones taste bad. And Ezekiel's like, nah, the brown ones taste great. Like, you know what you're talking about. Rats are delicious. And above them is a giant, like, military propaganda poster that says, freedom awaits, enlist today. And it's a dude dressed in a cop uniform with a young boy. And, like, that specific poster, the freedom awaits, enlist today, is a recurring theme through the book. And it's a rallying cry for one group of people, and it's a very specifically codified, synecdoche for everything that's wrong in society for another group of people. And that question of are you willing to enlist, or are you willing to put yourself into a system in order to find stability for your loved ones, is the kind of fulcrum that the book takes place on. It's a how far are you willing to go? How much of your morals are you willing to sacrifice? How much of your body are you literally willing to sacrifice? For your dad, if he has a heart valve that has planned obsolescence, and the only way you can get that money is by being a police officer. Like, how are you willing to make those sacrifices?
Yeah, that's the kind of serious shit I want to read about in my Cyberpunk comic, man. I dig it.
Thanks,
I really like the whole message of a lot of that stuff is it's offering quote unquote freedom, but it's in the worst, most possible way. Like, we'll let you work inside this little box, provided you'll step inside the box and never leave. I really like that.
Yeah, I'm really excited about it on multiple fronts. I'm really excited about it specifically because it gives Alexis a very wide-ranging and visually iconic palette to use. You know what I mean? Because there's a very codified thing that he wants to do, right? And I want to write to that thing, and I want to make this be like I love Space Riders. I love Tarantula. I think he's a great illustrator, and he's worked with some great writers, and I think that a lot of his books are 100% Alexis Ziritt books. And I think when they don't work, when people try and get in his way. And so my goal was to try and write a runway that he could use to really take off and like make the best work that he's ever made. And I think even just those 10 preview pages that are on the Kickstarter, like those cityscapes with all those wires and crowd scenes of people milling around, being depressed, searching through rubble, and like cops milling around on top of like giant border walls. Like, I think that already for my money is pound for pound some of the best work he's produced, which is saying a lot. Like, he's a singular voice, and I am so excited to see the rest of this book realized through his pen.
Yeah, totally. I am as well. I think that's one of the things that like I want to see more of what this guy's capable of doing. Like, given some of those preview pages, that's the thing that impresses me the most. It's like, I've seen his other work, and to see him get so meticulous inside this book, just in these couple of pages, it's like, what else are you guys going to do? Like, I got to imagine you've written some insane shit for him to draw, and that's the thing that I want to see. Like, what goes beyond just the introduction to this story?
Yeah, I'm very excited about it. I hope that, we can raise the money that we need to raise, because, full transparency, Floating World, who publishes a lot of really great books, they're not in a place right now to be able to pay Alexis in advance to be able to live to make the book. So we're running the Kickstarter and pre-selling the comics in order to get enough money to pay him to make the book. It's going to be in Diamond, so it'll be in comic book stores. It'll be in Barnes & Noble, but we need to get over that gap of we need him to make the book. And unfortunately, yeah. I'm not in a position where I have enough money to be able to just front that cost, which I totally would if I had it, because I think he's amazing, and I believe in the story, and I believe in him. And right now, I think we're about like 60% funded. So, only a few more tens of percentage points to go.
Yeah. Nick, was there anything else you wanted to dive into with this? I know we could probably sit here and talk about Cyberpunk for forever, because I really want to I'm really curious about like where the world is in terms of like we're 100 so years in the future. Like cybernetics are a regular thing. We're talking about people are exchanging body parts for like this taste of freedom. And I think like the idea of, having to be a cop to do something, I don't know if you can expand upon that without getting too deep into the book, Dave, or like, what does that mean for like an everyday citizen in this world of future Venezuela?
Yeah, I think it's delicate because you don't want to say too much, because that is a very big conceit of the book. But I will just say that I think I would say like planned obsolescence something that is,
Ooh.
I think culturally, we're going to have a really big reckoning with in the real world and in our book.
Yeah.
Like, I think the fact that we're no longer producing goods that are meant to last and that they are meant to have a half-life, I think that is something that is very dangerous. And I think I am aware of why a late-stage capitalist society is, has manufactured a system where everyone has accepted this as but I think that is a deeply troubling thing, because we are very quickly going to be entering a phase where those planned obsolescence life cycles are getting shorter and shorter and shorter and shorter, to the point where the vast majority of people will not be able to keep up with that cycle, and then you'll almost have two groups of people who have the technology or the access to healthcare or the access to a status or a way of living that is what we deem as comfortable, and then a group of people who are literally living in the past. Or metaphorically living in the past. They're living on technology that we have improved well beyond. They're living in on food that we know doesn't really doesn't provide the human body with the sustenance that it needs. And I think that is something that is, while it is, honestly, it's not. Like, that's just something that we're literally doing right now.
Mm-hmm. Which is kind of maybe the worry of writing Cyberpunk, maybe. I mean, I don't know, as someone who's not a big writer by any means at all. Like, I think, Cyberpunk, it runs this border of, like, how close to reality do you actually want to get? I guess that's maybe a question for you. It's like, how close were you trying to write to what could be, like, expounded upon today's technology and world into your book? Because, I mean, 100 years in the future, a lot can change in 100 years. But where were you trying to draw the line to say, like, oh, maybe this hits a little bit too close to home or not?
Yeah, that's definitely something I deliberated on. And the way that I thought about it is I wasn't trying to necessarily predict what would happen 100 years in the future. I wanted to make a narrative box that was constructed in the same way that, like, a lot of Italian knockoff movies are constructed. So, like, they say, it's Space 1999 or, Escape from the Bronx, which happens in, like, 2004 or whatever year that movie happens in. There's all these, like, these time periods that are just enough in the future so they're like, oh, we'll get there, but it's so far off that you can, like, imagine a world. And I wanted our, 100 years in the future Venezuela to kind of function in that same way, where it would be like a knockoff future where it's almost like you're watching, like, I think a lot about Night Hunters as, what if Alexis and I found a movie called Night Hunters, which was about a group of paramilitary dudes and cyborgs in 100 years in the future in Venezuela, but then we made, like, an art house comics adaptation of that movie.
I see.
And tried to,
that's
like,
really cool.
Kind of like, you try to, like, bend the pretzel back. So you take this, like, I'm really fascinated with taking what is conventionally deemed as a low art form, aka comics, and trying to make complex, sophisticated, highbrow stories with it. I'm very fascinated by the idea of utilizing a quote-unquote lowbrow medium to make high art. Obviously, I don't think it's a lowbrow medium, but there is a cultural consensus that thankfully is being eroded, that, comics I feel like there was, like, comics as one era, and then Biff Bang Pow, comics aren't just for kids, was the second era, and now we're entering a third era where you see this boom of kids comics and YA graphic novels, which I'm really excited about because I love that stuff. And you're seeing, like, this last year, they say 1986 was a pivotal year for the direct market. That's the year that the book stand or a newsstand distribution crossed each other, and the direct sold the newspaper stands. And that's when you get things like Mouse and Dark Knight Returns and Watchmen. They all came out in 1986 because the money and the attention in the direct market was enough to support that. And I think there's something really interesting happening right now, because this last year, 2018, I think, was the year that the book trade, legacy publisher sales of comics passed the direct market. So now we're kind of, the direct market is still here, but it's slowly starting to sunset, despite all the death throes and new IP farm publishers that are trying to throw their hat in the ring. The direct market is right now heading towards a sunset, and the book trade market is now expanding at very rapid growth. And that's, both of those things are very exciting to me. Not that I'm excited that the direct market's, having trouble. I want all comics to succeed. But innovation comes through times of trial, so I'm excited by this potential for growing pains.
Yeah, and I think something like Kickstarter helps that a lot in showing that there's more than one way to get a book, which is why something like, Night Hunters and the numerous other books that do very well on Kickstarter, like, super makes sense for the current era of comic book readers and consumers. Like, being able to just easily pay like $15 for a digital copy of a comic is amazing, versus having to like go to Comixology or go to some other website and get your weird, offshoot site to get your actual comics. Instead, it's like there is this central hub for people who say, I have a comic that's very specific in telling this story. I probably couldn't necessarily make it on like the book publishing scale, or in some cases the direct market, and they can say, no, but we can publish on Kickstarter and you can get a copy of that book, even if it only reaches 4,000 people or something like that. I think that's like an amazing side of comic books that is still growing, ever growing, I think, and has been for like the last 5 to 6 years.
Yeah, I completely agree. And also, like, it's very exciting, specifically because a lot of times the thing that's so frustrating about comics as an industry is that it's so labyrinthian and it's such a boys club, and you have to know the right person to be able to get the handshake, to go into the back room, to make the deal. Like, right. That's the beauty of Kickstarter, is like, you don't need any of that. You just need, like, I don't know. I mean, you said 4,000, and shit, man, I'm trying to find 4,000 readers. You can do a very successful Kickstarter with like 100. Like, if you have 100 people who all give you $10, you're off the fucking races. Yeah. And I think that they're like, everybody knows 100 people. Do they know 100 people that give them $10? Nah, maybe not. But everybody knows 100 people.
I was going to say that might be a bridge too far.
It is and it isn't. I think the nice thing about Kickstarter is that it's a rallying cry. It's something that's culturally understood. It's something that is very easily comprehensible to a layman, like going and pre-ordering a comic at a comic book store and then 3 months later getting a single issue and spending $6 and then going down there with gas. Like, that's confusing. What's confusing is, or what's simple and easy is, this is the thing. I put X amount of money and I will get mailed the thing. Great. I will do that. Yeah. And that's one of the many reasons why we're doing the Kickstarter, because it is a simple, effective, easily communicable means of distribution, which is something that comics has struggled with for a long time. And I also want to just say that to anybody listening right now, that doesn't know, right now there's been some labor disputes at Kickstarter, and there's a union being formed by the Kickstarter employees. And I fully support the unionization of Kickstarter, and I think that it's something vital, both for that company, but also just in general. And I think that it's important that we all show the Kickstarter employees in the union support in this time, because they've been going back and forth with Kickstarter leadership. And so far they've supported they've supported our Kickstarter specifically. Kickstarter has been very good to me. I've run 3 of them. This was the 3rd one, and it's a very positive tool. And I feel like the people that have helped propel this tool and change so many people's creative careers and lives deserve to be treated with respect, and to be paid a living wage, and to be helped in their time of need. There are multiple petitions that you can sign. The Kickstarter Union has a a document that you can add your name to if you want to profess support for the union. I have, but I think it's also just important. I basically mean that as to say that the Kickstarter people for the comics division, Camilla Zhang specifically, has been very, very good to me, and they've really helped us out. And I would just like to say that whatever they need from me and my cohorts, I hope that we show up, because comics needs more solidarity.
Totally. Yeah, I think, and we'll provide a link to some of that stuff in the show notes for this episode, because I mean, I'm right on board with you. I think I've signed a handful of different things about that in support. I know you're not the first comic creator on Kickstarter who's reached out like to the people that backed their projects and say, hey, we should all rally around this, because I totally agree. It's something that the people there definitely deserve. Yeah, and they I mean, look, Kickstarter isn't, they're not working in the military-industrial complex, They're not working making missiles or something. They're out there in the streets trying to help people fulfill their dreams. Like, Kickstarter is a place of innovation, and it's such a shame that the leadership has been interacting with the union in the way that they have, and I hope that they see the error in their ways, and I hope that the union is recognized and that things go swimmingly for them, and that they are given everything they want. I think collective bargaining is a great thing, and I think that in comics, everybody is so dispersed and they're so in their own corner that it's very hard to rally around each other in our time of need. And comics obviously has a lot of times where people are in time of need, and comics as a culture, man, we all come out. Like, whenever somebody, and this is a shame that it manifests this way, but when somebody like Bill Mantlo has all these health problems and has all these back medical bills, people come out and they give money, and I think there's something wonderful about the connection that we all have through this medium, and we're a community and we should take care of each other. And I know it sounds cheesy and hippy dippy as I'm like talking about planned obsolescence in the military industrial complex and being all edgy and bullshit, but I really do think it's important that, like, everybody in comics, we should watch out for each other, because there is a long legacy of people not watching out for each other, and it doesn't help anything. Like, it just makes everybody sad and sullen and alone. And, like, while the statistical probability of me dying at a drafting table is probably pretty high, it'd be really nice if I didn't die that way. And so I feel like we should all just, like, be cool and take care of each other and respect when somebody's like, yo, I need some help. And if these Kickstarter people, employees, are saying, yo, I need some help, let's fucking show the fuck up. Yeah, man. Absolutely. I'm 100% on board with you. I think that's a great final message, I think, for this. I mean, Dave, I know we could probably talk for another hour. I think this happens every time you're on the show. I think it's what's going to happen in the future when you're on next time. But if we have the, I mean, seriously, we got to have you back as always. But yeah, I guess any final notes, Nick? Do you have any final bits and pieces you want to add to the conversation before we sign off here?
I mean, not really. I think it's very interesting that Dave is writing a book in a genre that deals with the dangers of corporations and their control over their constituents. Meanwhile, Kickstarter is dealing with what it's dealing with, and I can't help but feel that there's an interesting parallel there. I
mean, that's something that is something that I was concerned about. Both the logistical standpoint of, like, when this, the announcement that the union was forming and that a couple of the labor organizers had been let go, that story came out, like, I think a week before we were going to launch the Kickstarter, and we had done everything, we'd done all this work, and it was like, well, what do we do now? Like, do we not, like, it's this weird parallel of the story we're telling of, like, how far are you willing to go to work in a corrupt system to get this thing that you want, where it's like, the irony is just crushing. It's so stupid.
Oh yeah, I can only imagine.
And also I want to just drive this point home. The Kickstarter union has not said that they want anyone to boycott yet. They have been very specific about collective bargaining, and that they want people to continue to use the platform as the tool that it was designed to do until they need collective support. So that is one of the many reasons why I chose to continue with the Kickstarter, because obviously I respect their wishes and their desires and their need for bargaining chips. And if I was preemptively bargaining, it's not collective, or preemptively boycotting, then it's not collective bargaining, and then it's not, all for one for all. It's a guy being like, this is my principle.
Right.
Well, I can't speak for everyone, Dave, but I do really appreciate that, you're willing to be forward and sort of not ignore the fact that obviously Kickstarter's got some issues of their own going on. And, I appreciate you being transparent about how that's affecting you and the fact that you're fully aware of it and you're willing to, just put out there your thoughts on it and just generally be conscious of that while also, doing something, at Kickstarter. I think a lot of listeners are going to appreciate that.
Yeah, and it's a weird situation as well, because at this point I know there are a few alternatives, but the options are Indiegogo or Kickstarter. And from my perspective, Indiegogo supports campaigns by people who have ideologically based motives that I do not agree with.
That's a tactful way of putting it. Yes.
I feel like we all know what I'm talking about. Yeah.
Yes.
People like Ethan Van Sciver and Comicsgate people who've used Indiegogo's lack of oversight or supervision to make products specifically targeted at a group that may or may not feel that they are being left behind, and that ideas like inclusiveness and diversity and accepting of people that are from different walks of life is a negative. And I obviously think those things are positives, and I don't want that is a system that I do not want to contribute to. So at that point it was, well, we either do Kickstarter or the book doesn't happen. And right. I think we should live in a world where Night Hunters exists. So you know what? Fuck it. Let's do this.
Hell yeah. Yeah, exactly. And, with that, I'm going to say, Dave, it's been fucking fantastic having you on, as always, my friend. Where can people check out this thing? It's all on, what's it called? Kickstarter.com? Is that what you said?
Yeah, Kickstarters.com. I think you can just put Kickstarters.com/Nighthunters and it'll take you there, I think. But if not, if you just put Night Hunters into Google or Night Hunters Kickstarter, or you go to Kickstarter and you put Night Hunters in there, you'll find it. Alexis is at Ziritt. You should give him a follow. He's been posting a lot of cool Cyberpunk related artwork. You can find me at xDaveBakerX. Also, I feel like every one of my feeds has just turned into Alexis artwork for the last 2 weeks, which I guess is fine because his artwork is amazing. So, that's okay. And also, you should check out Floating World. They publish a lot of other really cool stuff. They published a book by Al Columbia, which is really great, about it's like a fictionalized book of movie posters from a film director from the 1930s who may or may not have existed, which is really good. They also publish all of Chuck Forsman's books. They put out really good stuff. Slasher, Revenger. They published the single issues for Corey Lewis's Sun Bakery, which then later moved to Image. They publish Zach Soto's book, A Secret Voice. They publish a lot of really, really good stuff. And I feel very, very honored that Jason over at Floating World has been super, super great to work with and has helped us out a lot, and also just likes our book enough to put it out. So fingers crossed this Kickstarter funds, baby!
Yeah. So don't forget to go over to Kickstarter, back that Kickstarter, get it in some form. It's going to be a fucking amazing book. I am certain of it. As always, you can follow us all on Twitter. Nick is at Death Star Plans. I'm at Mike Rappin. The show's at IRCB Podcast. I'm not going to go through the whole spiel for this thing because this is kind of a shorter episode. But, make sure to go to ircbpodcast.com, rate and subscribe, tell all your friends. Thank you to everyone who listens. Thank you to Dave for being on this episode. You are fantastic, man. Thank you so much. And, I guess until next time, Infinity Shred does all of our music, Xander's our editor, and until next time, comics are good, And so are you.